Cool. Thanks, Chad. No reason to do introductions. I'll do that within the scope of outside of the video here. 3 questions on program metrics, a little bit of background on that. Generally, when I think about an experimentation program, I like to break it down generally into revenue metrics. You think about conversion rate and AOV, sales efficiency, marketing efficiency, stuff like that. And then program metrics, test velocity, efficiency, agility. Recently, I've started thinking about a concept of a third tier, third pillar of metrics, that being platform metrics, right? So for one, can you give me your feeling on like that division, like program versus platform versus revenue metrics? And then geek out on what are some of the platform metrics that you think about top of mind with experimentation?
Yeah, I definitely think that it makes sense to have a 3-way division between program metrics, like you said, platform metrics, and then like your customer metrics, your direct customer metrics. I'm not sure I would necessarily frame those as revenue, efficiency, and platform, because I think the things that a platform can provide could also be revenue, could also be efficiency gains. I like, there's a startup framework that I've heard before, which I think applies here, in that there's sort of 3 tiers of value when building a startup. There's a company that is pitched as making you money, it's pitched as saving you money, and it's pitched as making things more efficient. And those tiers of value are basically like, what is the response you're going to get from your customers? If your product makes you a lot of money, that's gold. If it's saving you money, it can be a little bit harder of a sell, because it has to apply to that very particular problem. There has to be a savings issue already. And then efficiency is actually the hardest thing to quantify. I've seen some people do it very different ways. Some people have said like, hey, I can save you, you have 2 engineers that are doing this work, and using this tool or using this product or this platform, we can save you those engineers, and then they can go off and do better things. In my experience, it's not that cut and dry when putting together experimentation platforms. So the metrics that you use are probably going to be flavors of those 3 buckets, and probably leaning more so to the cost savings and in the efficiency buckets. But if there's a way to make the connection to revenue, and I have done it in the past, then definitely something that should be done.
Yeah, I'm wondering if like trying to make a 3-pillar framework out of this is a bit much. I like the connection with the startup framework, but part of me wonders, like, should we draw a line between the money and the efficiency? Because there's the old saying of like, people would buy vitamins and aspirin, but they occasionally buy vitamins, but they always buy aspirin or something like that. It's like, relieving pain is the ultimate, thing that you want to sell. So I'm wondering if like separating into 3 tiers, program, platform, and customer, I like that more than revenue. If we're trying to like, thinking about it, we're geeking out on it too much, over prescribed precision here maybe. Well, cool. Second question for you. As we think about platform growth, when do you see, can you step me through your philosophy on, as a company, because you've worked for a lot of different companies, as you step through the evolution of what you need from a platform? You've mentioned before that, you go from something free like Optimizely to something like your homegrown solution. You've told me before that a lot of times in more advanced situations, like 75% of the use cases of experimentation are not going to be found within even an advanced tool. So can you step me through that evolution, of the platform?
Yeah, totally. So I think there's sort of 2 evolutionary tracks of a platform, and they go at drastically different speeds of attaining maturity. The first track is, it really depends on where the acquisition of a tool, or where the first need for a tool is. If it's on the marketing team, then usually most of the scenarios that marketers need to run A/B tests on, which is, like web tests and tests on a mobile website and things like that, are usually really clear. I need to split my traffic 50-50. I have all of my metrics that already exist on the web somehow. And so the sort of connection to like a third-party tool, free tool or otherwise, Google Optimize and Optimizely or whatever it is, that's kind of it's sort of a clear choice to make. I find that usually smaller businesses start with the free tools, which also makes sense because they need to learn like how to use these things. There is a gradual learning curve. And so paying $500,000 for a tool that you don't even know how to use appropriately and you don't have anyone hired who can use it is probably not a great investment. And then the next stage is, okay, either the free tool is sort of worn out its welcome, or we know we need a bigger thing because we're trying to change the culture. And once people do this for a few years, the inevitable like progression that I've observed is the marketing team or whatever the experimentation program management team is that exists wants to do more stuff. They want to go experiment in the product. They're like, hey, we have opportunities with these product managers and we want to start running experiments through Optimizely, but for some reason they're facing pushback. Engineers are saying things like, we can't use Optimizely, we can't use VWO, we already have our own tool that we built to do this ourselves. And that's sort of where the conflict sort of comes into play for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, that engineering-centric tools and tools that tie in directly to a company's, like read directly from a business's data warehouse, as an example, or they allow for much deeper customization of the types of statistical algorithms that are used. In those use cases, it's hard for the third-party platforms to compete because it's so specific to the nature of the business. To give you an example, Convoy, right? I'll give you one example I just worked with the other day. We have Convoy is a digital freight network. So it's a freight brokerage, a digital freight brokerage, and it sort of serves as this middle point between your shippers who want to move freight around and a trucker that wants to go and bid on some freight and get it and make some money and take it somewhere. And Convoy is basically an auction platform for that. So it's built on machine learning models. Everything that we do is sort of centered around machine learning. And so there's a lot of areas of optimization in this very legacy industry. And one of those areas is our RFP process. So the request for pricing, what happens is shipper says, hey, all brokers, in a region or in the United States, I have all of these shipments that I want to ship over the next year. I want you guys to bid on those shipments and give me your best prices. And then I will choose a percentage of brokers to take each set of shipments. These brokers or these shippers like to diversify so that if any one broker fails, then they still have like 90% of their shipments are taken by more trustworthy people. And so what you do is you make bids, right? And you usually make bids programmatically because there's a lot of shipments coming in. These RFPs are coming in at one time. You can actually apply experimentation there. And this is a totally offline thing, right? They give you an RFP. You can then consume the data from those lanes. You can run a forecasting model to predict like what is going to be your cost, like what is going to be profitable, and then sort of mix in things like, well, we want to grow our relationship with this customer, so maybe we should price it, maybe give them a bit of a discount. But those are one-off things that you can do. You can run experiments where you say, let's give them the flat price for 30% of their shipments. Let's give them a premium for 30%, and then let's give them a discount for 30%, and see what happens, right? And you run it exactly as an experiment. And if you're getting a lot of RFPs all the time, running those manual experiments is actually like really time consuming and a major efficiency suck. So you can build a platform that allows you to do that in a totally automated way and can feed directly back into your predictive algorithms. And so the whole system is just learning and growing and evolving over time. And that's a great example of something that would never work in a third-party tool, but could generate like, tens of millions of dollars of value for a freight brokerage.
Well, let me dig into this a little bit with my third and last question here. You've got this idea that you have the experimentation as a concept that can touch marketing in a simple way. It could touch the engineering and product in a little bit more complicated way, and then theoretically, like as your example illustrates, sort of this these other scenarios that are even more complicated and that go beyond that third-party tool.
Right.
I'm curious about like the experimentation program structure. Then, like, where do you see the breakpoints if you want to build, like, for example, a center of excellence model where you have like one team, one group doing experimentation, should they have the headspace to understand the marketing experiments and the more complicated ones like you're doing, or should you have a decentralized one, even in a mature conversation? Sorry about that noise there. Even in a mature conversation or a mature organization, it should be decentralized because the problems are so different. And like, where do you see the breakpoints there?
Yeah, that is exactly sort of it's the struggle that I've had when trying to have the conversation on what is experimentation program management exactly, what should it be. A lot of the times I see it very centered around the marketing side of the house. And when that happens, because you don't have anybody on that team that's super familiar with these like very niche, difficult data science problems, then inevitably you end up missing out on a huge amount of situations, and it can be a big turnoff, right? Like I've been at companies where my methodology of going to teams and building sort of experiment platform features that help them was, don't tell me, you don't need to tell me what type of experiment you want to run. You can let me figure that out as a platform manager. You just tell me the problem that you have and whether or not it needs attribution and how difficult attribution is. If it's something like, and attribution is anything where you're making some process change and you're expecting that process change to have some material impact on the business. And so I think if experimentation programs are not thinking along those same lines, it's going to be really, really difficult to get to a point where you're going like way beyond marketing and into product and into some of these other use cases, because the first line of thinking is always going to be like, hey, does it work with an A/B test? Does it work with a 50-50 split? Is it something that we can do using Optimizely? And if the answer is no, the conversation just starts there and it stops and the team never experiments, So I think a better approach when thinking about a program management, my recommendation would be at some maturity level, like after the concept of experimentation is like deep in the company, whether it's marketing or product or anywhere else, there almost must be an investment in a platform if you really want to continue to grow the value. Like at some point it just plateaus. You know what I mean? Like if you really want to have that like exponential sort of linear growth of experimentation, like you have to move into the platform space and start handling the scenarios that are very custom to your organization. Yeah. And in order to do that from a program management perspective, you need to be thinking less about A/B testing and more about how do we attribute things that are very hard to attribute.
Yeah, ultimately, I've got a philosophy that every business is built on a strategy, and a strategy is nothing more than a hypothesis. Like strategy and hypothesis, there's an equation sign right there in the middle of them, and the experimentation program should effectively help you test your strategy, and that might look differently, and the overall business strategy can trickle down to a marketing strategy, product, etc. And those things need to be tested, and sometimes that A/B is one way. It's just a way to collect data. An A/B test is just a simple way to collect data.
Exactly.
In a similar way that user testing is, right? So, we need to like expand what the definition of an experimentation team is. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that is exactly my perspective. And I've had so many conversations with people where I go to them and I'm like, hey, have you thought about doing experimentation? And they're like, no, our use case doesn't really fit into an experiment.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, well, it must actually, because even if you're just deploying things at 100%, even if you're just making changes, that's a very common experimentation use case, like just making changes and then observing, pre and post. And you can go about doing that in a rigorous way or doing it in an unrigorous way, which is usually what's happening. Yeah. So there's sort of a thought that gets into people's minds, and this has a lot to do with like the state of the tools that exist, and nothing on them, but there's when you have a limited set of use cases, then you're going to push those use cases as like, this is what A/B testing is. And so a lot of people they don't quite realize that experimentation goes way beyond that. And the role of a platform, in my opinion, is to think about how can we take an experiment that is incredibly expensive to do and incredibly difficult for any one person, especially a non-data scientist, to do, and make that automated so anybody can do it in any use case.
Yeah. Cool. Well, man, thanks, Chad.